Welcome to the Heartland Journals podcast with your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the show. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community. Welcome to our People in the News, where I interview people who are making an impact and are lovers of truth. Today, we are talking with very special guest, Ralph Winters. I'm hoping you learned things today you didn't know about the movie business and culture, which for my whole life was dominated by Mr. Winter. But first, I want to remind everyone to please subscribe to heartlandjournal.com. That's how we grow and keep this content free for you. And if you like what you hear, share it.
Hitler has captured the nation's imagination, Dietrich.
Bravery is a rare commodity. You will go to England as our spy.
What good is the church if it doesn't speak for the victims of the state?
The church's job is to kindle peace, peacefully.
Oh, you mean silently?
I need you to understand that your life will not be the same after I speak these words. We have devised a plot to assassinate the Führer.
Guide our hands. Guide our trembling hands.
God sent Germany a true savior!
Our silence in the face of evil is itself evil.
Words aren't words anymore, Dietrich. They're nooses, bullets. This is a trigger that cannot be unpulled.
Will God forgive us if we do this? Will He forgive us if we don't?
Ralph Winter, producer, production manager, director. 6'4" tall, says IMDb. 1985 Saturn Award nominee for Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. 1986 Best Special Effects nominee, Explorers. Love that movie. Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Television Movie, Hocus Pocus 2 in 2022. Executive producer of such hits as 2018 Adrift, 2016 The Promise with Oscar Isaac and Christian Bale starring, and of course, Star Trek series beginning with 2 as post-production supervisor and on to executive producer 4, 5, 6, and on to the franchise hits beginning 2000, X-Men, and all the sequels. Fantastic Four, the original and Silver Surfer sequel, I, Robot with Will Smith, Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg, and a special shout out for Captain Ron with Kurt Russell and Martin Short. I love that movie, and many, many more. I could go on. Odds are, if you've seen a movie in the last 30 years, Ralph worked on it. Including my favorite this year, the original producer of Reagan with Dennis Quaid, according to IMDb, over $2.5 billion in total box office gross. Wow. And a new gig as of November 2024, last month, head of physical production Sphere Entertainment Company, Las Vegas. You've seen it, the ball that has about 1 billion TVs on it and can do just about anything. We're going to talk about all of that and more. Mr. Winter, Merry Christmas. Are you joining me from LA today or Vegas?
Merry Christmas. I'm in La Crescenta, Glendale, Burbank area, so near Los Angeles. I go to Vegas a couple times a month as we, make product that goes on the screen there. So
all right. Well, yeah. Those Malibu fires threatening you or your home at all?
No, we're far away. We're far away from that. Thank you for asking. We do live in the foothills, but that's all spread out here in Los Angeles, and that danger is real for a lot of people. And we live in a scrubby, dry area, and those winds kick up, and but we're safe. Thank you.
Good. Well, God bless. It's kind of the 6th season, right? You got winter, spring, summer, fall, mudslides, and fires. So it's just normal. Tell us about the Sphere. That thing is new and amazing. I've had folks rave about it for the U2 concerts and the Eagles just last month. We were talking about it yesterday. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm very privileged to be able to work there. I've been consulting for probably 5 years and came aboard about 2 years ago full time. And in my job, we make the content that goes on the screen on the inside. So there's the outside of Sphere that you see publicly. We call that the exosphere. And they make, I'm not a spokesman for Sphere, but I'm just telling you what I do. Um, the exterior is about 50% art and about 50%, commercial, promotion and things like that. So almost runs 24 hours a day on the outside, and you'll see, a lot of different things. And it's sort of taken on a life of its own since it first went live about a year and a half ago. Um, but what I do is work on the inside, which is the backgrounds for U2, for Dead and Co, for uh, any of those events that happen on the inside, as well as we created a movie, cinematic experience, experiential, immersive, called Postcard from Earth. And that runs during the day, several times a day, along with some other stuff. I think Jim Dolan, who owns the company, really wanted to create something that is immersive, that takes you to another place. And that display surface is 3.5 acres in size. There are millions of LEDs. It runs at 60 frames a second, twice what television does. And the resolution is 16K by 16K, which is by far the highest resolution in the world, 100 times more than a movie screen. So there's a sense of immersion and reality when you're there looking at it. There's 164,000 speakers delivering digital audio. The seats have haptics in them. We can deliver also through some other devices, smell, hot, cold, wind, smoke. And the idea is to create an immersive thing that you feel like you're in a different place. So Postcard from Earth attempts to do that at the first step. And we're working on more programs now that, take that even further so that you can go to Sphere and sort of be transported almost like Star Trek to a different place.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's like IMAX on steroids, or I used to go to the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood and try to
Yeah,
get that as immersive as you can. I saw Terminator 2 there.
yeah.
This is the quantum leap of that. That's amazing. Can't wait to see it
And
myself.
what happens is that you can't take it all in with your peripheral vision. You have to look around to take it all in. It's all enveloping. And we've had kids and families come and kid tugging on his dad's shirt saying, "Are we outside?" Because it's a
Yeah.
little confusing.
Yeah, the brain
And
won't know. Yeah.
yeah, so we're taking advantage of that and trying different things. As one of our leaders at the company says, you know, Postcard from Earth was our first pancake, and it's burned in a couple spaces. It's not cooked through in a couple places, but it works. And we're making more pancakes, and we'll make better pancakes by the time breakfast is served. So we keep going.
And as that shrinks down to the AMC theater level or the home entertainment level, I can
No,
see a
no, no,
whole new
no,
market. No, never.
no, never. The idea again, we're not going to go to DVD. We're not going to, make this available anywhere else. You have to come to Sphere to experience all those things.
Wow.
Nobody else has this. Nobody else has the level of intentionality or quality or resolution. And so we don't want to diminish the experience by making it available on DVD. You're going to have to go to Vegas or to Abu Dhabi or wherever we build the next few that you go to experience that. You go to be transported. You go to be to go visit another place, underwater, outer space. We've had a camera on the space station. We're doing all sorts of things to create those experiences in a way that you've never had before.
My goodness. Well, my North Star for this show was somebody who once said politics is downstream from culture. And that
Mm,
culture he was talking about was Hollywood. And he said it
mm,
from LA. Star
mm.
Trek dominated the 80s and X-Men Y2K. Did you have an eye on America, maybe world culture when producing those movies?
Not really. I think, in my world, we're about creating, entertainment, and we're about telling a story. We're not about sending a message. I sort of, I don't subscribe to that. It was a famous quote from old Hollywood. You want to send a message, call Western Union. I think, making a story and entertaining people is the primary purpose of what we're doing. Now, let me just say, for instance, we made a movie about the Armenian genocide. Nobody wants to go see a movie about genocide, but we framed the story with Christian Bale and Oscar Isaac as, and a young woman as a romantic relationship, and these people who are dealing with culture in 1917, 1916, and it just happens to be set in Turkey, in uh, uh, you know, Armenia, and what happens around it. We educate as a side note about what's happening in the world, but primarily we're trying to entertain and tell a story. I think that that's if there's a message coming through, it's a byproduct. So if there's a message coming through in making the X-Men movies, we're trying to get at big universal questions. Where do I fit in? Should I fit in? Should I just go my own way, or should I work with others? And this is stuff that was generated in the comic books in the 60s. And those guys dealt with those issues. And I think those questions are universal, whether you're 13 years old and don't know whether you should fit in, or you're 84 and don't know if you should just be discarded and there's no place for you to fit in. I think those are universal questions, and it's why those movies did so well, is because they tap into that, along telling a story and an adventure of where they're going and who's trying to, defeat a bad guy.
Yeah,
But
nobody wants a lecture. They want to be entertained while also
that's
getting out of it.
correct.
And boy, did they do well. The Star Trek franchise is estimated to have made over $10 billion in revenue. The films have grossed an estimated 2.27 billion worldwide. Have you ever been to one of those Trek conventions? I mean,
Oh
talk
yeah.
about
Oh
cultural
yeah.
phenomenon. They must treat you
Oh
like a
yeah.
god there.
They don't know me very well because I'm not up front. I'm not an actor. I'm not the writer, but I am, for the real aficionados. They know who I am when I show up. I went to the one in Vegas about 3 months ago, and it's still astonishing. 65 years or however many years. Um, Maybe it's only 55 years. I can't remember.
No, 1960
Um,
to 24. Yeah, that's about right.
yeah, yeah. So there were thousands of people in Vegas on a convention hall that was massive. They took over a hotel, and there was just lines of people for obscure characters because they love that world. They love that there was a vision of the future where they could participate, they could be, uh, again, not unlike Sphere, they could go to another place and live there. And so they dress up like those characters. They write books and stories. They create props. They do all sorts of things to sort of, you know, cosplay or whatever for that world. And they love it and share and talk about and create their own community about that. And like many things, I think Star Trek was probably the first. I've been to those conventions, not all of them, but a few of them since I started working on them in the mid 80s. But it's an astonishingly pervasive community that desires something better.
And don't
And
forget, they saved the whales, so that was a cultural message of its time, right?
that
Search for Spock was more about than whales.
was Leonard. Yeah, that was Leonard's idea. And you know, yeah, we enjoyed that. And that's probably, interestingly enough, probably the most successful of the Star Trek movies, the early ones with the original cast, because you didn't have to be a hardcore Star Trek fan to appreciate it. It was out in the world. It was fish out of water, literally, of being in San Francisco and these weird people. And Spock tied that band around his head to hide the ears, walking around in a robe at five corners in San Francisco. Um, yeah, I mean that one performed because it got across, and it demonstrated that, the weirdness of those people of uh, of Scotty picking up, a mouse and wanting to talk into it, not understanding the computer of its day. Um, yeah, that was an enjoyable film that people still, watch and enjoy.
Did you ever get to meet Gene Roddenberry and hear how he
Oh
might have
yeah.
felt about
Oh
it?
no,
What
no,
what
no.
did what did he say to
We
you?
were we met with Gene regularly in making the movies, and I was with Gene a couple of weeks before he died because I showed him Star Trek Six: The Undiscovered Country. We
Wow.
He wasn't involved in the production as much after the motion picture, but he had a consultation right, and so we were always with him and consulting with him. And he always had comments and criticisms and ideas that he wanted to do differently, and we navigated that. And the last movie, he was not doing well. He was in a wheelchair, but he wanted to see the movie, and so I took him, and we went to the studio theater, and I think he may have had one or two people with him. He was in a wheelchair, but he enjoyed the movie. We talked about it, and then, sadly, he passed away a couple weeks later. But he was a great man. He had a great idea that, you know, he was able to market with his wife, Majel. They they did a good job of spreading the word.
And that movie is about the undiscovered country, heaven, and so I hopefully he was feeling pretty good about his next
Yeah,
chapter after that.
yeah, yeah,
The highest grossing movie franchise of all time is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It
yeah.
would not exist, in my humble opinion, if not for you, sir, with those original X-Men films showing that they could work. We just saw this year your Wolverine teamed up with today's Deadpool, who was your Deadpool as well, as a matter of fact, in
That's right.
X-Men Origins.
That's right.
$1.3 billion worldwide this year, number two. Do you have fond memories of working on those movies? And Hugh Jackman pretty
Oh
much
yeah.
was discovered in X-Men 1, now a huge box office star. Logan did 600 million on a $97 million budget, so it's profitable. Ryan Reynolds too in Wolverine Origins and Blade. Do you have fond memories of those movies?
Yeah, the first movie when we made it for $75 million, people said you're crazy because the only comic book movie ahead of that was Tim Burton's Batman, and it didn't do that well. Uh, and the comic book craze wasn't there. X-Men had been in development for, a long time in terms of uh, trying to find the right story and then finding the director and Bryan Singer. But we faced a lot of tension and pressure in making that movie because no one really believed it. No one thought it would work. Um, I remember we had a premiere of the movie on Ellis Island, which was appropriate for the storyline. And everyone loved the movie and they were astonished. They had no idea. Um, and yeah, Hugh Jackman, was one of the we actually had not cast Wolverine until we were already shooting 3 days in.
Hmm.
We were in Toronto and he would come in for a casting session and we put him on film with Anna Paquin and some others. And I remember standing next to Bryan Singer while we were filming, while the camera's rolling. I stood next to Bryan and said, "This is the guy. Don't let him go. Don't let him go home."
I can't think of anyone
And
else that could possibly on Earth have done it.
well, we interviewed and had a number of other people, and we went down the path with them. But and we faced criticism from the fans. Hey, he's too tall. Wolverine is short. He's built like a fire plug. You can't do this. And it's funny. I had learned this in the Star Trek movies. You have to listen to the fans, but you don't have to do exactly what they say. You know, we got a letter writing campaign when there was got a whiff that we might kill Spock. You can't kill Spock. You can't do that. You're ruining a character. And well, you can if you do it right and you bring him back. And then you can't blow up the Enterprise. What are you talking about? You can't do that. It's a character. Well, you can. And so we are able and we're able to. It's hard to imagine Wolverine now outside of Hugh Jackman. And we made a couple of jokes about that in the first movie because everyone said, they got to wear the yellow spandex, and now they come full circle with that joke in Deadpool and Wolverine.
It's perfect.
So
Yeah, perfect.
Hugh Jackman is what you see on television in terms of a host of the Emmys or the Oscars or whatever, that's who he is. He's a regular guy. And he's fun to be around, polite, generous, and just one of the good guys. You appreciate when somebody reaches that level of star and fame that he's not a jerk. He's a regular guy. And we're good friends. We don't talk that often anymore, but when we do, we connect and it's a good thing.
Must be that Australian in him, like Mel Gibson or Hemsworth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you see the post-COVID, less theater going experience business going?
It's a good question. I think, right now the movie business is struggling with the traditional models of people in theaters. Um, I don't know that anyone has a clear path, and there's lots of opportunities for streaming and YouTube and other ways to get stories told. I get approached by a lot of young filmmakers that want to know, how do I get stuff made? And I say to them, don't think that your measure of success is, being the director of a movie distributed by Paramount Pictures. There are so many platforms. There are so many ways to tell stories. You can shoot a movie with your iPhone. There's no excuse anymore if you have a story that wants to be told. Remember that, in a world of Avatar, the picture that won the Oscar Best Picture was The Artist, which was shot in black and white and was silent. If you deliver a show, even in a world of technology that's compelling, and there's a reason to go and there's a reason to enjoy that, people will come. I tend to be, as an Academy member and a producer, more about the communal experience. I think it's in our DNA about sitting around a campfire, telling stories, teaching the younger ones about how to get away from that saber-toothed tiger or whatever it might be. And that tradition is deeply inside of us. It's, in 1930s, a movie critic was talking about how much we enjoy going into a darkened room for 2 hours, hear an inspiring story, and leave, refreshed and, energized to go forward. And he was talking about how that used to be the experience in a church or a synagogue, but that's what the movie experience was providing, the same thing. And so I like, being at Sphere, where it's definitely a communal experience, a little different than going into a movie theater, but it's more like a Broadway theater or sort of an interesting amalgam and newness of that, but you experience it together, a story that you don't quite know where it's going, but you're going to find out with all those people sitting beside you. I think that communal thing is never going to go away. It's convenient to have streaming and watch Netflix at home and chill and all that kind of stuff. But, um, you know, movies like Black Panther would not have been a cultural experience if it was streaming. It was a cultural experience because people dressed up and went together. People went together and dressed up for Barbie. They didn't really dress up for Oppenheimer, but they went as a group. And so those cultural experiences, I think, are rooted in viewing these things as a community and not just viewing them as individuals. And that's hopeful to me. That's, Broadway's as busy as ever. Wicked is killing it on Broadway and of course now in the movie theaters as well. And kids are dressing up to go see Wicked. So I think those cultural defining moments are always going to be that group experience. It's harder to do that now when we have so many choices, so many platforms. But we'll figure that out. We'll reinvent that process and figure out a new solution.
It's always the stories, right? I mean, all
It
all
is.
about the stories will bring them in the doors if they want to see it. If it's formulaic and here we go again, probably not. The X-Men and even the 1960s Star Trek TV were always this inclusive human harmony themed shows, working together for all mankind, save the universe together. The mutants were divided by Professor X, MLK, content of their character
Right,
types, and
right,
Magneto, Malcolm X, by any means
right.
necessary, more militant, more Marxist. What do you think about those civil rights icons when making your cultural relevant movies?
Well, the movie that I have in theaters right now on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, um, here in a very small world is a cultural icon. There's a statue of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Westminster Abbey. There's 10 people that are honored as martyrs of the 20th century, and he's one of those, and he's next to Martin Luther King. Not many people know that. And so that was the motivation for making the movie, as well as I had studied his writings when I was in college and even in high school. And, we're always I'm always interested in characters and heroes that are unassuming, that they're not intending to be a hero. They don't grow up saying, I'm going to be a hero and I'm going to do this. But they end up at hinge points of history. They end up at critical places. And now they make a decision in sort of a crucible of pressure of what am I going to be and how am I going to act? And what decisions am I going to make? And I think it's always interesting to see people like that in those hinge points. I'm watching on Netflix Churchill at War. Same thing, extraordinary preparation in his life, and he's in a unique place at a hinge point of history. So is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he makes a decision that most pastors, theologians, preachers wouldn't make, that he decides to join a conspiracy to eliminate Hitler because no one else is taking action in the church and because he feels like, you know, rather than face, you know, why did you do this? He felt the historical hinge point of history was going to be, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you step up when you knew this was bad? So that's a compelling story. And it's interesting to see, what are the things that shaped him. And I hope that in every movie we come away looking at, well, what are the things that shaped me? Would I do that? Would I make the same decision? Uh, how would I respond, to that kind of thing? I do a class in my church. It starts up here in January where I take the 10 Oscar nominated best pictures. I don't choose the movies. They're chosen by the Academy and Academy members, 6 or 7,000 members. Here are the movies that we think are worthy of being honored and have value long term. And so I do this at a church in a Sunday school class where I make the class watch that movie ahead of time and then come to class, bring your Bible. Let's talk about what the movie's about. What are the questions? And how does that match up with what you believe? Would I make that decision? Would I go that path, or would I choose a different path, and why? And it's always interesting to find out from a variety of filmmakers the questions they're asking. To me, movies are about questions. They're about, why am I here? What does it mean to love somebody? How do I fit in? Do I belong? I think those are continually every single thing. We've been working and studying The Wizard of Oz, classic 1939 movie. What does she want? She just wants to go home. She wants to understand. And at the end, that's what she learns, is that I don't ever want to leave. Everything I needed to learn, I could learn right here. There's no place like home. Those stories and lessons, were sort of learned emotionally and experientially, throughout the history of movies. And we love It's a Wonderful Life. We love Wizard of Oz. We love, some of those classics that remind us of how to make those decisions for, Bailey Plumbing and all that kind of stuff.
Dang, that sounds like a class I'd want to take. Have we gotten superhero fatigue, and did
Um,
Disney go too far with Star Wars? Too much content, too much money, too uninteresting?
yeah, I do think, look, I only made the first four as producer on the X-Men movies because I got tired. I mean, I loved all the people and all that, but honestly, we were making the same movie over and over again. It's about a guy who has claws that come out of his hands. He's got a dark past. He has a funny haircut, and he's angry. And I made that movie 4 times. And when you think about it, when you look, I mean, I enjoyed it. I'm grateful. I was in the right place at the right time, and I was privileged to be there. But after I made the fourth movie, it was like, what am I doing? This is the same movie. And honestly, I didn't keep up with the rest of the X-Men movies. I loved Logan, and I've yet to watch Deadpool and Wolverine just because I've been busy, but it's kind of the same movie over and over again. And I think that fatigue you're talking about has set in. How many more explosions? How many more big things? How many more times can we end the world? You know, there's enough, that happens in James Bond, but there's enough time in between that you want to really see how James Bond is going to do it this time and what the new, what the bad guy wants this time that James has to unravel and figure out. The relentless delivery of that with all the characters to support that big wide world in Star Wars. Um, you know, yeah, it could be a little oversaturation and sometimes holding things back. It's not a bad thing. We've become used to 10 episodes drop on Netflix, uh, you know, with this instant gratification and some of those older things that my mom taught me and grandma of, you can't have everything right away and you need to wait.
That's what
And
I
there's
always told my kids during the Harry Potter. I said, "You're so lucky.
yeah,
You get to watch part two tomorrow. I had to wait 4 years to see."
yeah, yeah, but it builds that anticipation.
Oh, it's
And
fantastic.
so,
You pay
it
for
was
it.
like
Yeah.
yeah, but you're putting the lid on the pot and let the water boil. And, by the time you take the lid off, everybody was like ecstatic about all that stuff.
Yeah. I didn't want to see what
We've
happened to Indiana Jones when he got old, to be honest with you, but they want to
right.
show me over and over again. All right. So back to
Yeah.
culture. The 70s, which was the heyday of movies, in my opinion. Scorsese movies,
Oh yeah.
anti-heroes,
Yeah.
post-Vietnam, like Taxi Driver, and Coppola's mob movies like The Godfather with the violence and the language and having us root for the bad guy to some extent. Bonnie and Clyde with Dunaway and Warren Beatty with the blood. Did you want your heroes to be more white hat, good guys, always win, like the old 40s and 50s censors made sure movies had in them, like John Wayne and Gary Cooper? Or were you into the anti-heroes, so to speak?
I think it's more I think we were always into more complex. Wolverine's a good example. I mean, he's pissed off all the time, but you love him. And I think it's always about with a hero who finds out which rules to bend to get there. Um, and I think, Indiana Jones is a good example. You know, when he's looking for Marion in the first movie and he loses track and he gets caught, and now he's confronted with a guy with a sword thing and he's going to get it. He didn't want to get in a sword fight. He pulls out a gun and shoots him. You can't do that. Nobody does that. Well, you bend those rules because he's got to go see Marion. He's got to find out where she is and save her. And so you appreciate when the hero bends the rules a little bit. So that complexity that's not completely
There's a
black or
very, very
white.
much an inversion of the Errol Flynn, who would take
Yeah,
on a 15-minute
that's right.
ballet sword fight, whereas Andy was like, bang,
Yeah,
1940s.
bang.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've graduated a little more to those complex heroes. It gets problematic culturally when we start to cheer somebody who shot a United Healthcare CEO. I mean, that starts to be a little weird. I don't know how to process that. Um, you understand the forces behind it, but that's just weird. Um, so,
There were movies that did
oh
glorify
yeah,
such
oh
things
yeah,
with Denzel
oh there are.
Washington. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. No, there are, and unfortunately, that's not necessarily, you know, there are times when art imitates life or people want to translate those things, and so that's an integrity responsibility thing. I'll give you an example out of the first X-Men, that I made a choice, and that was that Magneto in that first movie, um, to get what he wants, out in front of a train station, um, throws up a bunch of cop cars and holds them up with his power. And then to get Charles to relent, Professor Xavier, uh, Magneto has a gun, and the gun goes right to the head of a policeman. And in the script, he was supposed to shoot him and kill him. And I had a really interesting conversation with the director, Bryan Singer, saying that that's a line you can't cross. You can't just do that. With this character and these things, you can't kill a police officer. That's wrong. And he was like, no, it's for the story, it's the stakes, it's a thing, and give me all the cinematic reasons. So I cheated. I went to the actor and I took him to dinner and said, you don't want to be the guy that lives with this result. And as with the example of that, outside of the character, you don't want to be that guy. And he thought about that and eventually, and we didn't do it. And so Bryan actually turned it into a more dramatic moment where you hear the gunfire off screen and you come back and you see the gun still there and the bullet is still there spinning. He hasn't killed him, but he's still controlling it. It was another step. And Bryan was able to milk that for more drama. And then, the picture went on.
That was quite amazing, yeah.
But Ian McKellen,
Sir Ian
McKellen realized the gravity of that. And so I do think not everyone does this, but I take that seriously in terms of what our responsibility is, particularly when you're making a movie for kids, of what example are you showing and how that can resonate. And it can be good and bad. Now, not everyone takes that opinion, and I guess they're entitled to that, and other people will take responsibility for those
Which,
decisions.
in a very interesting way, if he would have been pegged as that evil man who killed a police officer, could he really have pulled off Gandalf the White, which is an amazing story? Who knows? It's very possible. You get typecast as like the evilest bad guy, the Darth
That's
Vader.
right.
Yeah.
Actors they wear some of that. They wear those characters, which is why actors tend to be very vocal about what they're doing on screen, because afterwards the public that pays for the ticket thinks, they have a special relationship with the actor, and good or bad, that can reflect on you. So
let me ask you then, the Joker and Harley Quinn versus, say, real life Daniel Penny or Bernie Getz, the subway shooter in the 80s. Do you think the anti-hero is celebrated still, or are we seeing a change where the good guy wins again?
No, I think we're still celebrating the anti-hero, and it's troubling. For me, it's troubling.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. The competing comic book company DC, sold to Warner Brothers, hasn't had as good a run with movies as Marvel at Disney. They've made tons of money, but just, not as good, not even as good cinematically. First with your X-Men at Fox and then Avengers ending up at Disney. I think because the Messiah complex characters, right? Superman can't lose, even comes back from the dead, in invincible, unrelatable characters. Did you prefer the more human characters when choosing material?
Oh yeah. And I think, DC has an enormous storytelling issue with Superman because he's so good. He is sort of a Messiah character. And that's a tough one to unravel, to tell a compelling story that, engages an audience. The first one that Dick Donner did had wonder and, awe about what was happening, and it did very well. But developing that, now they've done a good job with Batman. I think Batman, Chris Nolan and others have done a good job because, again,
He's
there's
vulnerable.
that sort of, he's vulnerable, but he's good and he's bad. Christian
And
Bale.
also human. He can get
Yeah.
his back broken, whereas Superman cannot.
That's right. And so I think Batman is beloved. You know, Kevin Feige, whom I know, he worked for us, as a PA on the first movie, and Kevin's a friend. He's a geek about all the comic books and is faithful to those stories from the 60s. And he's developed that universe based on that original stuff and done a very good job of it. And he's very, has a lot of integrity towards all of that material. I don't know why the DC folks can't figure it out. I'm not really sure, but I have preferred the more human characters in X-Men and the Marvel
Yeah,
universe.
so much richer of character development.
They are.
And the mutants also had a lot of other outsider themes to society. They came out of the same they came out the same time as gay marriage was a big issue in politics. Let's face it,
Hmm.
that passed Congress in 2010, the year after your X-Men Wolverine came out. Did you ever have to take into account the effect the allusion to homosexual relations and politics and Hollywood were having? Disney
Oh
has
yeah.
been way more overt in this decade than you could be back then, but the big legal civil rights decisions came down, after 10 to 20 years leading up to X-Men Wolverine.
Yeah, I think if you go back and watch, the first couple of X-Men movies with that pair of glasses on about, you know, do I fit in or don't I if I'm gay or I'm not gay? You can see those issues are there. They're lightly touched on, but not overtly. Um, they're there if you want them. They weren't trumpeted. Um, but it's always interesting to go back and watch any of these movies in today's lenses, and sometimes it's hard to understand some of these older legacy movies without understanding the cultural context of how they were made. You know, but yeah, I think you can see that if you go back and put those glasses on.
And Uhura was literally a black woman cultural icon of her day when science fiction really didn't seem to have much of a place for blacks. If you look at, say, Dune or, oh, I don't want to get personal, but do you agree with that? Do you think she was a character rich in?
Oh yeah, and we're so far outside of that context now. We don't. It's hard for us to understand how dramatic and how impactful her presence on the TV show. I was just a kid, but um, how different that was, and that interracial kiss between her and Bill. Um, there was also, we struggle with this on the movies. Um, she also felt, marginalized because she was a woman. And I remember a number of times she came to me in the movies and said, Ralph, um, I am not going to be the intergalactic telephone operator anymore. You got to give me something more to do. Now, as a producer, when you're developing movies, it's a lot easier when you have one hero, James Bond, Indiana Jones. You can focus the main storyline on one. But when you're in X-Men, when you're in Star Trek, you've got six heroes, seven heroes, five heroes, whatever. They all have to have something meaningful. I do think that in The Voyage Home, the whale movie for Star Trek 4, we did a better job of being sure that Chekhov had this to do, and Uhura had this, and each one had a meaningful role to play in pushing the caper forward and finding the solution and pulling all the threads together. But it's a lot harder to construct those stories. It's not as easy. Um, but she was definitely impactful early on, and I think blazed the way for a lot of people that could see, for young black girls to see themselves in her position, that she was, recognized and a star. And I think, you know, it's the same thing of seeing a presidential candidate or seeing Taylor Swift or understanding that you could be in a different position in a different place. I think those examples are good for everyone uh,
Yeah, and in the
to
modern
see.
Star
And
Treks, they have Spock and Uhura as a romantic lead.
yeah,
Although I don't think she's
yeah.
African American. I don't really know. What do you feel streaming has done to the industry in terms of how much content they are constantly pushing out and the ability of movies to make a profit?
The good thing I think is that I think streaming has created uh, bigger and more diverse and more and deeper stories. So that who was I was trying to think, somebody was mentioning the other day that um, I forgot the term, but it used to be in the 70s and 80s, television had, a miniseries, or it was too big for a 2 hour movie. The 2 hour movie became something in television in the 70s. It was
Like
more than a
Roots
TV
and
show.
Lonesome Dove, those type of
Yeah,
miniseries. Yeah.
and and Shogun and Winds of War, those kinds of things. But
Serials,
I
I
think the
guess.
resurgence of what we do in streaming now is that it's deeper than just a TV series, and it blurs the line of a feature film or, a TV series. And I think that's useful. I think the writing gets deeper and better on some of the streaming series. And so, you know, it always becomes again a saturation point, right? 500 channels and nothing to watch. So it's still involves, integrity and equality. And I think some of the fears about AI are just not well founded because I think the audience is smart enough to see, what's, a bad carbon copy as opposed to what's generated by a human and meaningful and emotional and all that. AI is
I was
just a
told by a
very,
pretty. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say that AI is just a big fancy calculator, and we ascribe, too much credit to all of that, I think.
Yeah, they can't do a human emotion yet.
No.
I was told by a very powerful Hollywood lawyer, you probably know him, if I wanted to make a movie and make money, it has to be action or horror. That's it. That's why there's so much of those two always out there. Do you agree with that?
A couple things I can say about that. One is I think horror has a low price point and it's easy to shock people and people like to be scared. And so horror is always going to have um, a place in our culture. I think it's also, rem ironically, the good guy always wins in a horror movie. And that's what people keep coming back to. And it's clear, it's black and white. It's rare that you have a horror movie that's fuzzy, you know. Um, I also believe horror movies will always be around because if you're a teenage boy, for 15 or $20, you can get a girl to hold on to you for 2 hours. And I think there's always been that sort of element of thrill and excitement and, the fun of being scared. Some people like that. I'll watch them, but I don't really gravitate to them. Some people are over the moon. That's all they can think about. That's what they want. And so I think they'll always do that. Action, similarly, you know, a lot of action movies aren't well made, um, but they can be made cheaply. And there used to be the $1 million movies they'd make in Hong Kong, and people just like that slapping around and fighting. And there'll always be a market for those, and those always those can cross, geographic lines. They're not cultural in that sense. A good guy, bad guy, scaring somebody or fighting will cross cultural lines. And so, yeah, it has a better opportunity of making money than a drama or, just a straight ahead talkie because that's bound up in the culture.
Okay. I found some info on you while I was researching this show,
Uh-oh.
and it was very
Uh-oh.
interesting. Well, the numbers are going to be wrong, I'm sure, because I keep learning that you can't trust the internet for anything. But it said that your gross is over 2.5 billion, but only 46 million from China. I can't really believe that, but that's what it said. But here's the point. I hear all the time, China tells Hollywood what to make and what to do. Famously, they took a Taiwan flag off of Tom Cruise's bomber jacket in Top Gun 2, which did gangbuster business. But that doesn't seem to factor for you. Have you cracked the code on ignoring China in their censorship and they're dictating how movies are made and done your own thing?
I think the movies I've made early on, there was no developed China market. So I think that's why those numbers are so low. I'm not surprised by that. Um, I have been to China several times, 4 or 5 times, trying to raise money to make movies. And they certainly want to go to school and learn, but I don't know that there's a genuine interest in making movies the way we make them. There's a different storytelling sensibility that works very well for their market, but not many Chinese movies break through and are box office successes here in the States. Um, there's always a desire for American culture, I think, around the world. And so off and on, American movies will do that. I think that's diminished now, and I don't know. I'm not a part of a studio leadership at the legacy studios, but I don't think they pay as much attention to that anymore. I think that is, the movies that do well in China are very narrow, jingoistic, militaristic, feeding their culture. It's a very narrow culture in terms of that the materials they consume. So I don't think it's an issue as much as it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where people were trying to maximize global box office and trying to appease different uh, cultures. I think we've been doing that a long time. I remember that Spielberg and making Gremlins for the version in Germany, when the Gremlins are at a bar, he made sure that when it was dubbed for German, that they found a German tune, a bar tune that was popular. So it would play in the background on the German version, and they feel like the movie was made for them. So I think we've always made accommodations, in a variety of ways to fit the market and tailor it for the market. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know that that's, you know, compromising your intellectual, artistic integrity because you have a German beer hall song when you didn't have that in the American version. Who cares? Um, so I think to me, a lot of that's sort of overblown.
Interesting. All right. Well, we saw a lot of messiness on college campuses this year. That's where the young people are,
Mm,
and I learned
mm.
about movies in college. And they were out on the side of terror and fascism like Hamas and Iran. Can you tell us about Bonhoeffer and what themes you were going for when introducing a new generation to the German pastor who was an anti-Nazi dissident?
Yeah, this movie's been in the works for a long time, probably 10 or 12 years, and a number of iterations. And, again, trying to find the influences for this character and why he made these decisions was part of the way to tell the story. A significant part of the story is some of his education at Union Theological Seminary in Harlem, in New York, and being exposed to racial tension in New York at that time, and getting a theological education, and the dissonance of those two things, you know, helped wake him up to the dissonance that was in Nazi Germany that, you know, not everyone saw, not everyone could take action on. And, uh, he experienced some of that violence, which, you know, motivated him to take action. And you got to be responsible in some of that stuff. Bonhoeffer in in a world that wants to value diversity is the whitest character you could possibly imagine. Um, so marketing that has to be around the actions he takes and the enormous forces that he's up against, and what can one man do. Um, so I think those are some of the factors that went into thinking about how you're going to tell the story in a personal way. And then Todd Komarnicki, who wrote and directed it, was masterful uh, in putting together the story again in the context of 1917, where you know there's a little bit of a device that he uses when he's a little boy. They have him running around, his older brother's chasing him, and he runs to his mom and says, "Mom, I need a spell. I need something that Walter can't see me." And she says she's making a salad, and she goes, "Well, strawberries will make you invisible." And she gives him a strawberry, and he eats the strawberry. And Walter comes around the corner, and he sees him, and he says, "It's a special spell about invisibility. I've eaten a strawberry." And his mom pipes in, takes a moment to take effect, you know. And then he runs and he scurries away and all this other kind of stuff. And his older brother goes to World War One and is killed and comes home, and he was his best friend. And in his sort of pain and grief about this, the little boy says to his mom, Walter needed a strawberry and he needed to be invisible. And later he pays that off with, at the very end, when Dietrich Bonhoeffer is at the gallows and he gives his Bible with his notes and some of his writings to a Nazi guard, that he said, please get this to my mother and tell her I needed a strawberry. Mm. I mean, there's wonderful storytelling to pull it all together about the decisions, the journey, all of the different factors weighing in on this guy and why he decided to do what he was going to do and how that shaped from even being a little boy. So
that's definitely something AI could never do.
No.
Put that into a movie for sure.
No.
So we're glad you're with us. Last question. I was listening to Mark Andreessen, the creator of Netscape and early investor of Twitter. He was talking about the future of AI.
Mm.
Do you think AI will be good for Hollywood or a force for evil?
No, I think it's good. I think it's a tool to be used and harnessed. I think we've been using AI in Hollywood for a long time in terms of visual effects and filling in landscapes and matte paintings and outpainting and characters. I think it just got to be used responsibly with integrity. And it depends on, at least on the visual side, the sort of models that you train on, have to be worked out. It's when you exploit people and when you record one extra and then don't pay for 100 extras and just, that's where it becomes, without integrity. There's all sorts of advances that we've used in audio with AI where you can take something recorded a long time ago that has the voice and the music and the effects, and you can separate all those elements that we could never do before. AI can do that. There's lots of tools that are out there to help create better stories, and even the Churchill at War that I'm watching on Netflix did that. They pulled out that audio of Churchill's voice and then reprocessed it so that you could hear it more clearly and not as scratchy and all that. All the AI tools are doing that in a way that makes those older stories fresh and interesting and compelling. I think it's a tool that we can use, and I think people have to stop thinking it has a life of its own. It doesn't.
So engineers should be nervous, but not producers like you who have an eye for talent. Okay, I hate for this to get lost in the forest of content out there. So what would you like to say about your Altered Carbon?
I really enjoyed making the pilot, and I think that, again, the big questions of, can you live forever? Should you live forever? What does it mean to have a soul? I thought those were the essential questions to get at. We started that in the pilot. I had some disagreements with the other producers, and so I was asked not to participate in the remaining episodes. But I think the raw material, are good questions and to me worthy of exploration. Some of the episodes sort of wandered into other things of fighting naked, and it was like, what are we doing? What's that about? But I thought the premise and the underlying intent and questions were brilliant, and that's what attracted me.
Got it. All right, Mr. Winter, well, thank you for your time. We're at the end here, so tell everyone where they can go to find out more about you, follow your upcoming projects, or whatever you want to say.
Well, I don't have a website, but you can find me on IMDb, which is sort of that website about movie television people. Bonhoeffer, I think, is still in theaters and is worthy of seeing. It's a great story. And I think the other movies you've probably seen already. And then, I'm really enjoying, and I think we're doing some really good work at Sphere. And, besides the concerts and Dead and Co. and Eagles and all those that are running as concerts and residencies, we're creating more material on the inside that I think is pretty compelling and unlike anything you've ever experienced before. So Postcard runs there every day. And we'll have a new one coming out in May. I can't talk about yet, but it's worth the trip if you go to Vegas. It's worth the trip over to Sphere to see that because it's unlike anything else you'll see in Vegas. Family friendly. It's not. There's no gambling. Yeah, there's no gambling. It's a technological marvel to go into the building, and you'll see and experience something you've never experienced before, and that's what's fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on with us. That is it for this episode. Thank you, Ralph Winter, for entertaining us, educating us, remembering the hero always wins, but heroes aren't perfect. Only one man was perfect, and he died 2,024 years ago this month and rose again. He'll be back soon. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. See you all next time. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God.
'Twas the night before Christmas aboard the Enterprise D. The ship's systems were quiet, as still as could be. The phasers were hung in the armory with care, in hopes that no Klingons soon would be there. The crew were all nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of shore leave danced in their heads. And Captain Picard, with his Earl Grey in hand, reviewed logs of missions that had all been quite grand. When out on the bridge there arose such a clatter, Worf sprang from his bed to see what was the matter. To the turbo lift he bolted, phaser in tow, ready for combat with any new foe. The starlight beyond showed a glittering view, but sensors picked up an anomaly too, when what to their wondering eyes should appear but a shuttlecraft tiny with a pilot most queer. A jolly old Vulcan, his logic intact, beamed aboard smiling, with a sack on his back. He raised one hand up in a salute so clear, and said, "Live long and prosper, I bring holiday cheer." The crew gathered round, their curiosity stirred, for Vulcans and cheer was a thing quite absurd. But he opened his sack, and to everyone's delight, gifted them gadgets that glowed in the night. To Riker, a trombone that held perfect pitch. To Data, emotions he could finally switch. To Geordi, a visor that showed every hue. To Worf, a Targ plushie, yes, even he cooed. To Beverly Crusher, a rare medical tome, and to young Wesley, coordinates to Rome. To Deanna Troi, chocolates that soothed every mood, and to Picard, a vineyard with bottles renewed. Then the Vulcan stepped back, his task now complete, and beamed to his shuttle, so calm, so discreet. But they heard him exclaim as he warped out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good flight."
Hi, I'm Deadpool, the other jolly guy in a red suit with a lap worth sitting on, here to tell you happy holidays. In the spirit of this most festive time of year, I've decided to release my holiday cheer all over the world. How, you ask? Well, you naughty stocking stuffers, brace yourselves, because starting today, you're getting not 1, not 2, but 12 glorious days of Deadpool.
The 12 Days of Deadpool starts now. Each day a new site will debut a tasty treat, and on the 25th, the sweetest gift of all, a brand new Deadpool trailer.
So sit back, hold on to your ornaments, guzzle a little eggnog, at least that looks like eggnog, and prepare yourself because it's time for St. Wade to put the win in Winter Wonderland.
Deadpool, in theaters February 12th.
Wesley, is that glue?
If
been dreaming of the wild, wild plains, walking where the pine trees dance.
Heartland Journal Podcast is the media property of heartlandjournal.com, where you can find news stories, commentary, and content serving the heartland of America. Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of the people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.